Speaking of students, we have a question from a student. How do we do science and incorporate this? So let's go to the video and meet him.
Hi, my name is Max Sesno, and I'm a sophomore at Franklin and Marshall College. And my question is, how can the National Academy of Sciences better be used to verify science and those who speak on behalf of it, when a lot of the controversy in science communication stems from who has the authority to speak on behalf of science? How can we use that academy better?
Thanks, Max. You're a scientist.
Well, first of all, I will say that the National Academy of Sciences is very involved in this. They have issued many statements on this, and they often issue statements on it. You know, there's a lot of skepticism in certain ranks about anybody speaking of climate change. It doesn't matter who it is. God could come down and talk about climate change, and it wouldn't be acceptable necessarily. So I don't know that we can really use the National Academy of Sciences. We just need a critical mass, and we just need to slowly and surely change people's minds. And I think it's actually happening. We're seeing it happen in public opinion. Unfortunately, we have to be somewhat patient. And it also unfortunately means that we're going to be a little bit late to fixing the game, and we're going to suffer some damage because of it. But that's human nature, right? Human nature is not to really deal with stuff until it's to the point where we really have to deal with stuff.
So we have to deal with other questions from the floor, and I get to invite anybody to the microphone now. And what I'd like to ask, for those of you who would like to participate in this conversation, target your question at the group or an individual, short, sweet, succinct, so that we can get more in. If one person steps to the mic and other people want to ask, please go to the back of the room, and Dan Reed, our executive in charge here, our executive producer, will steer you toward the mic one at a time. So who wants to go first? Anybody brave? Sir. And I'd ask you to just introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, and then fire away. And others who have questions, please go to the back of the room.
Michael Swoboda with George Washington University and a contributor to Yale Climate Connections. Wondered if the Covering Climate Now initiative was a factor in any of your activities, any of your programs this year.
We love Covering Climate Now. We are members as well.
Can you just explain what that is?
It's a journalistic consortium of news organizations and climate organizations who are committed to covering climate change, and we contribute stories to them. I would almost liken it to an Associated Press of news things, because you have the access to the stories that each of the members are using. It's fantastic. We were doing it first. We joined on, quickly, because we love them, and we also love the folks at Yale, by the way. But we use the research as well.
And you love the folks at GW.
I love.
Just want to make sure.
Border on obsession. But yeah, so yeah, absolutely, it's an amazing organization, and I want it to really grow and gain continue its momentum.
You've quantified some of this, haven't you?
Me personally, yeah, it's great. I'll tell you why it's great. Because it was started by Columbia Journalism Review, which is kind of a standard bearer in the industry, and I think that for executives, especially in New York, they hold Columbia Journalism Review in high esteem. And one of the obstacles that we've faced is, especially over the past year or two, is should we cover climate change? Is that such a tainted and biased story that I felt that way. And I think what happened was when I signed up when I brought it to the attention of CBS News and we got signed up, when our president signed up, all the other journalists who were kind of waiting in the background, who wanted to do climate change but didn't want to say they wanted to do climate change or weren't able to push it through, the moment that our president signed up with Covering Climate Now, who might have done it because of the credibility that Columbia Journalism Review has, all of a sudden people came out of the woodworks and wanted to do climate change, and every reporter was fighting over stories, and so it gave us cover. Covering Climate Now.
Reporters needed cover?
Well, I'm not saying that they did, but I'm telling you, having kind of worked to bring it to CBS, why I brought it to CBS, because I think that a lot of journalists were tiptoeing.
What about CNN?
I think.
I'm not part of, I don't know.
Do journalists tiptoe on covering this story?
No, not that I'm aware of. No, we have quite a few people fighting to cover these stories. It's a priority of our news president. It's a priority of our digital news president. So it gets attention. It gets on the front of our digital page. Even if it's a story that is about a very small study that no one cares about and 3 people read it, it's still getting the attention.
Another question from the floor as someone moves to a microphone. How do you deal with colleagues in a more influential position than you who don't believe in climate change? Have you had that experience?
I haven't. Not where I am right now, at least. Yeah.
Do you have advice?
I mean, we have a memo in our company that says this is real, and so at least at my network, we're very lucky we don't have those kind of conversations.
I have a friend at Fox.
Is that a comma or a period?
Comma. And we've actually had this conversation.
Really?
Yeah, nobody, and I live in reality, so nobody at our program, at Project, we don't have that issue, but it's the decision to not cover it. I don't think it's so much as they don't believe in it, but they don't believe in they've not made the decision to cover it.
Does that friend of yours fight that or try to?
She tries.
And
she tries.
How? What does she say? This would be a great example.
Mm-hmm. She says this is crazy, and and they ignore her. Mm-hmm. And they say that our viewers see this as a political problem.
Mm-hmm. They do.
And it's rhetoric and jargon, and we're not going to engage in that. We will cover the weather. Mm-hmm. We will cover rising sea levels. We will certainly cover the storms, and we will cover the news of it. But we are not going to, and I don't think this is a written rule, but they have told her, in her capacity as a show producer, that we're not going to do this. And I got
so walking in with the science, showing the hockey stick, showing temperatures, that's not going to move somebody like that?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Data's never going to move those people. That's never going to happen. It's all about ideology. The reason why they will push back against climate change has nothing to do with the science. It's all about their predisposed ideology. So you need to meet them where they are. It's the same answer again, which is if they are religious, maybe you can talk about religious stuff. If it's that they're conservative, maybe you need to talk about how it can make for a better economy. How it's not a crisis, but it's a climate opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to be a better nation.
It's like with same-sex marriage. There were lots of people who didn't believe in equality for marriage, and so there was a movement to get people to come out. Right? It was simple. It was just, so then when friends in conservative circles saw people that they liked were in this world, and they couldn't hate you, right? Because they knew you, then they started to change their minds. That's why the human stories are so important.
Well, and you might have even been someone's son or daughter, and what gets interesting in the climate discussion is how young people are changing their attitudes and behaviors. Next question.
I'm Houston Miller. I'm a climate scientist at GW. That's not what my question is going to be about. So I'm reading through David Wallace-Wells' book after reading the article and attending Frank's session on this, I guess it was just last year. And I was struck by something that, and I'm paraphrasing in the first chapter they're talking about, and I'll put my own words in here, climate change are the middle and last names, but the first word is global. And in that first chapter, he talks about how at a time when this really is something that calls for international cooperation, nationalism is really destroying this. And as someone who spent a lot of the last couple of years nonstop watching CNN and MSNBC, and hour after hour we get politics, which I feel is a little bit pushing us a little bit more toward those nationalistic things, is what are the responsibilities of the networks to broadening the perspective and bringing back international cooperation?
Great question. Go ahead, CNN.
I cannot speak from our network or the decisions that they make. I do think it is an international topic, certainly. We write a lot about it, and that's where the majority of our people are reading us as opposed to always watching us. It's an important part of the conversation, and yes, I think certainly global is it. Global in terms of ratings doesn't sell, right? So you have to be able.
Global in terms of ratings doesn't sell?
American news doesn't cover the world as much as when you're in the rest of the world, right? So you have to trick people into caring about the don't quote me on that.
Too late.
You have to help people understand
Yeah.
why the rest of the world matters.
Yeah.
So it's probably not the best answer to your question, but I think that people are seeing it. There was a study just this week about how pollution impacts across state lines, right? It's not just because it's in your backyard, it's several backyards over. And how important it is that at the national level we care about this, not just at the state level. You know, you could have the cleanest air in the world if you take care of it, but if New York is not taking care of it, then we're in trouble. So we try to show those connections and try to remind people about why those things are important.
Okay, you want go ahead.
I was going to say, we look at best practices. So, for example, there's an African in Tanzania, I think. There's a global farming initiative to increase sustainability, and we showcase those, right? As here's what our farmers could start doing. They're taking the lead. The windmills, wind factories in Norway. We tell those stories, and just say, again, globally, here's what they're doing. Why can't we?
But this is brutal stuff. I get to tell a story now. When I was doing my documentary for CNN, I was going to go down to Brazil because I want to do this cool story that 40% of Brazil's transportation fuel comes from sugarcane ethanol. Like, that's ridiculous. That's a renewable fuel. It's amazing, right? And so I was ready to go, and somebody called and said, "Why are you going to Brazil?" And I said, "What do you mean, why am I going to Brazil? 40% of the fuel is grown from the ground." And they said, "Americans don't give a bleep about Brazil." That's a quote from a producer. And I had to go head to head and said, "Hang on a second." And he finally said, "Okay, you can go, but you have to promise you'll make it real and relevant to an American audience."
Yeah.
So here's what I did. I rented a little Chevrolet in Brazil. I drove through the sugarcane field. The cameraman was next to me in the seat. It was the coolest stand-up I ever did. I was driving. And I said to the camera, "I'm driving a Chevrolet. Why do I have to come to Brazil to fill it up with renewable fuel?"
That's good.
Okay, was that okay?
That's
Is
good.
that okay?
Awesome.
That's good.
But it's like, why can't we just make something intrinsically interesting that's interesting? Well, we can't. The fact of the matter is we do have to make it relevant. We have to be thoughtful of our audience. Next question.
But like you keep saying, we have to meet the audience where they are, so we have to help them understand why the rest of the world
Right, so
matters.
rent a Chevrolet and go to Brazil.
How much was that gas, though? How much was it?
It was a little bit more. It's a little bit more, and it smells like molasses when you go to the place. It's kind of cool, but they, I mean, it's a really interesting story because you don't get quite the same mileage out of it. Actually, it was less. The cost was less per gallon or liter, but you get a little less mileage. But it's equivalent. Okay, but why would somebody pay $85,000 for a Tesla? Okay, I mean, you got lots of questions here, and people make choices all the time. Next question.
Yes, and that kind of leads into my point. My name is Michael Kohler. I'm a sophomore here at the School of Media and Public Affairs. I took Director Sesno's class on this topic last semester. And so what I really liked what you guys were saying about, bringing in Middle America and, covering stories there and meeting, people where they are in that sense. And I was recently in Davenport, Iowa, where the river flooded the town, and they don't necessarily believe in climate change, but they know for sure that downtown flooded last year because of the Mississippi rising. However, that being said, there's still big things to tackle with climate change. And I think, some storytellers might be reluctant when you tell them, "Hey, we need to talk about this problem, but hey, don't name the problem." So where, if we're getting in the weeds here, where in language do we talk about climate change without saying the very polarized words of climate change?
So instead of saying the actual words, I will often on air, I'll say "in a warming world" or "as the world warms" in a kind of passive way. But the real story in places like that is the fact that, wind turbines, industries are coming alive. Places that were dead for decades are, kids don't have to leave and go somewhere else. They can stay home in their towns. The real stories in these places are, believe it or not, the solutions for climate change are coming out of Middle America. So don't talk about climate change. Don't force it on them. Talk about how these great stories and these great opportunities are coming out of Middle America, because that is really the story in Middle America oftentimes. I'm not saying you don't mention it, but be subtle. I rarely ever use the term climate crisis.
Do you use climate crisis?
Every day.
You use climate crisis.
I climate change. Crisis, no, not so much. But change,
change, and you're doing climate crisis.
We do, that is one of the words, one of the phrases, yes.
But I use it in context, right?
context, yeah.
If it's a story about fires in
Right.
Australia, yeah, I'll use the word climate crisis then. But it has to really feel like a crisis. It can't be some crisis that's going to hit in 20 years. If I'm not going to use that word, because I think that you'll alienate people. I want to bring people in.
In Davenport, though, I mean, if you have an opportunity to show the data and say, do you remember when you were a kid, did you see the floods like this? You know, and just remind, people have very short memories about their experience, but if you can remind them about, you know, as they were a kid, oh gosh, I don't remember it flooding so much. And just kind of bring it into relative terms that way.
They can connect the
That seems
dots.
to
You don't
help.
need to say the words
Yeah.
climate change.
Yeah.
You know, they see it. They see it. They just don't want to admit it.
Sure.
So just keep showing them, you know, little by little, and you know, it'll come around.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Quill Robinson. I work for the American Conservation Coalition. We're the largest right-of-center environmental group in the country. So I'm your token Republican here, talking about diversity. So I want to double down on weather porn. I think that this is a really important point. And as we I think that the awareness of climate change has spread massively, and I see that among fellow Republicans, young Republicans in particular. But the story of climate Armageddon is taken too far, and I see a lot of science and disinformation, or anti-science disinformation when I talk to students. For instance, people thinking that we are going to die in 12 years, and that's just not the science. And so I want to take a hard look at that and really hear you guys' opinions on how can we be more discerning about shifting the conversation from climate Armageddon to solutions. Because when I talk to a lot of students, they don't know that American emissions went down 2.1% last year. They don't know the innovation that's happening here. And so we have an opportunity to shift it from alarmism to solutions, and I want to know how you guys can do that.
I'm going to actually start that because the frame around the Planet Forward project is innovations. The whole idea is, what are the innovations that can move the planet forward? That's news by definition. Some of them are unbelievably interesting. They're going to happen anyway, whether you believe in climate change or not. We're going to have electricity storage and change the way we power ourselves. Period, full stop. Okay? And it's also exciting because people love inventors, right? So there's a great space there, but I'm very mindful of what you said, that that's not the stuff that rates. People want the solutions, but they watch the weather porn. So take on his question.
I will. Number one, I do have to tell you that people are already dying. And we already have climate refugees. There are parts of southern Louisiana that have been completely evacuated, where entire generations of families have been displaced already. So that's real. That's all. I'm just going to ask you to acknowledge that that's real. Part two of that, though, is that there are natural resources available. You can use nature, you know, whether it's replanting of trees, whether it's rebuilding of oyster walls, whether it's, you know, using sustainable projects and products along the way. There are some both nature-made and man-made solutions, and we do try to focus on them. We were actually just in Davenport as part of the series that we did on we followed the Mississippi, the peril and promise along the Mississippi, and Davenport was one of the places where we started. But so yeah, the stories are there, and you know, you do try to show those, but human nature is that you always look at the train crash, right? You just do. It's just human nature. I wish I could say that, you know, we don't, that we, you know, keep our eyes focused on the road and continue forward, but we will always look at the crash. This was what we are. So those are the two things that I would just like to say to that point. But please know that it's really, people are really already dying in America.
Jen, you have a comment on the question?
I mean, I think what's wonderful about the climate conversation is it is all encompassing. So we do write about the young inventor who's working on better energy efficiency. We write about carbon capture and how expensive it is, but boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could do this? You know, we talk about these issues. They may not get as many clicks, but we still do it because it's important to be able to kind of seed these conversations and be able to inspire people, hopefully, to make it better.
We need to wrap in just a few minutes. I see a couple more questions. Let's see if we can get to those quickly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lisa Palmer. I am the National Geographic visiting professor of science communication here at GW. And I come here with a background of 20 years in journalism. So I've been covering the climate change conversation since around 2007, almost exclusively, ranging from deep dives into religion and to public health, or even just the science of climate change. I'm now teaching class in science reporting here at GW. I don't use this word, I'm going to borrow this, so be the troops of the willing. I'm teaching them how to be the trusted source and how to get science in on every beat. They can have a science story in every beat that they cover. How can they get the climate change story in every beat they cover? How can they be those troops of the willing that can actually bring, some of the science as well as the climate story in whatever beat they end up covering, whether it's they're covering something around, whether it is truly in the science beat or public affairs or international politics or whatever they're doing. How can they get that climate story in there?
Eugenia,
There's so much intersectionality, right? You can't do a health story without eventually talking about climate. You can't do a financial story without, I love talking about the financial aspects of solving climate change and making money. That is the A+.
People like money.
People like money. People like money.
Turns out.
Right, and so
who would have thought?
So financial stories. The intersectionality is so across the board: race, ethnicity, healthcare, building blocks. It's just 2 Google clicks. You're gonna hit it. It's there. It's just there.
Last question.
Hi, Karen Florini from Climate Central. Jen, this is a question for you, and it's related to a couple that have been asked before, one on connecting the dots and one on solutions. Is there a way to integrate mentions of solutions when you're doing broader stories that aren't climate-based, but rather based around the economy, based around national security, based around health? How do you make that work?
That's a great question. I do think, yes, absolutely. If you have time. Right, so if you have a minute 15 package when I was working in local news, probably not. But when we talk about the economy, most definitely, we will highlight an industry that's doing something innovative with solar energy. Or we can talk about why Honda's hybrid didn't do so well, but Toyota's did well. So because it looked distinctive, right? So we can talk about things that are impactful without necessarily saying this is a climate change story. Absolutely, and I think it's really key because if we don't weave it into conversations, then essentially we have to normalize it, right? So it's not just this other thing that we're going to think about when we have time or when we can be in the right place to think about how scary it could be. Right, so if we can integrate it into business and talk about healthcare. I talked to somebody about a efficient run hospital, and we were talking about something completely different. But she, in that conversation, said, we actually have a whole sustainability culture here. We have a committee working specifically on this issue. So all I did was write a sentence about it in this conversation about how hospitals are trying to save money. But I got calls specifically about that one line. So I think that is definitely an effective thing to do.
A few years ago, a student went out and did a story on DC taxis, which is not known to have the most modern taxi fleet in the world, and found a fellow who was driving some 1903 Crown Vic. The old Ford Crown Vics, get terrible gas mileage. And then found somebody who was driving a hybrid. And just did the story on the gasoline savings between the Crown Vic and the hybrid.
Really
not only made the payment on his new car, but put more money in his pocket. It wasn't a climate change story. It was just a dollars and cents cool hybrid story. It's like, whoa, I think I'll go buy a hybrid. That's a lot cheaper. So you kind of can make a connection on that level.
So I want to go back to the question that you asked. What's your name again? Quill, okay. Because I think it's important that we acknowledge something that he's bringing up. Now, I don't know if I have the answer for you. Although I will tell you, when I communicate climate change, I try to do it as balanced as I possibly can. I don't go overboard because I don't want to lose the people that I really need. I already have most progressives. I don't have to worry about them. I have to worry about bringing in the people in the middle, the people who might be willing to listen to me. So all I would say is understand what he said is true, which is that a lot of people on the other side of the political spectrum truly believe that this is, they really believe it's socialism. They look at climate change as a proxy for socialism, especially the ones that are on the far right. So you can ignore that fact, but we will need everyone's help to fix this problem. Everybody's. So understand when you say stuff, it can't be flippant.
Right.
You know, you need to be honest with people. This is a real emergency, but it is one that we can, that we can take on, and we have to do it in a way where we're inclusive of other people. And for some people, the words climate crisis, climate emergency are no. They are not. They are going to shut people down. So that is my answer to you. I understand that. It's hard because every time you write every time a headline is written for a newspaper or a website, it's written to be the absolute worst part of the story. And so if people don't read the story, they're like, it's everybody says we're going to die. Well, the story really didn't say that. The headline kind of alluded to that. And it's just the unfortunate part of capitalism and making money in,
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic to this. I mean, I think you're right, and we we need to try to talk to all people, and we can use different words at times to do different things. I remember a conversation I was having with mayors, and I asked them, when you're making your sustainability case, especially to your underserved populations, how do you talk about sustainability when people have very pressing, much more immediate challenges in front of them? And they all said, well, we don't talk about sustainability. We talk about we'll do an energy audit and help you save money on your house, we'll plant trees, and your street will be cooler, and we do it that way. And I agree with that, but I also have a problem with that. If you go to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, I can't use the word diabetes because she's going to think that's a political thing. That's ridiculous, okay? At some level, it is ridiculous. I get it, and I acknowledge it, and that's one of the reasons why we've got our frame around the innovations and the ideas, but there's another part of it that's just absurd. That the science is what the science is. Would you go to your doctor and say, please don't use the word diabetes when you tell me what my diagnosis is? And that puts people who are communicating in a very difficult space because you want to be honest, you want to bring them the facts, you want to tell the story in the straight way, but you also have to acknowledge we're in this very challenging environment. And there's no easy answer to this, but don't you see that that's...
Listen, I've been having to deal with this for years now, so I know exactly what you're talking about. It is frustrating, there's no doubt, but it is the reality.
But I'll let the farmers say, or the councilwoman in Miami say sea level rise, and then in our copy, our script, we'll say climate change, we'll say climate crisis, and it's a negotiation, so we'll have that. We'll feature she was a Republican that believed that her constituents were going to suffer greatly because of this, and again. The vocabulary isn't as important as the pain point there, I think, and focusing on that pain point.
Eugenia, I'll give you the last word here, since you worked at more networks than the rest of us. And you've got your whole beat now, which is remarkable and great and very exciting. Do you think that this story, not as a story, but as an issue that we tell through story, has legs, if we can, as the term we use, or is this a moment? Is this a fad? Is this something that's here now? Have we crossed a threshold where there's enough information and enough appetite that, like the national security beat that news organizations have, like covering the White House, you gotta cover climate, and it ain't going away?
One of our education partners, which is not as great as this university.
So don't name them.
See, she knows her audience.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Knows her audience.
That's why her ratings here are off the charts.
Drink with your branded mug.
Yes. They have received so much interest and information about it that they are literally in the process of considering an entire school dedicated to climate change.
Where is this?
I'll tell you off camera.
Now we all want to work there.
Well, I will tell you that Columbia University is building a climate college.
That's
building
the
their own
one.
building. Oh no, but that's common knowledge. I mean, they just released some type of
Yeah, they did
memo.
announce
University
it.
has a sustainability minor that has 300 students, minoring in sustainability. And
300? That's
Yes.
fantastic.
That's fantastic. But what I'm saying, yeah. So the short answer to that is absolutely it has legs. I mean, I think this is now an entity that is not just being studied, but it's being lived. It's being experienced by people, old and young, all races, all the genders and all areas on the spectrum of gender. And it is real. It's here. It's not going to go away. We have to fix it. We have to solve solve it. I think that between nature and man-made genius, we have the solutions. We just have to be willing to do it. We just need the willingness to fix it, right? So we need to stop fighting or squabbling over terminology and just roll up our sleeves, make the decision that we are going to say we are united Captain America. You know, we are united Captain World, or whoever. I don't follow Marvel, but you know, whoever the people are with the ring and everybody. But honestly, we need to make the decision to save the planet, because this is what we have.
Life can be better than it is. I mean, we don't think about that. Life can be better. It can be better. We can have a better life in the
There
future.
is an incredibly optimistic story to be told here, because not very long, we actually had rivers on fire. Not very long, Los Angeles was totally choked in by smog, or Santiago, Chile. Not very long ago, coal was burning in London and you could barely breathe, okay? We are capable of doing this. It is political will. We have the innovation. It's an exciting story. It's an incredible story. It needs to be told. You guys are doing an incredible, amazing job. So Jeff and Eugenia and Jen, thank you so much for coming here. Go out, make noise, tell stories, and don't end it. They'll live happily ever after. It's a much more complicated story than that. So keep it going, keep them honest, and go, go, go. I want to thank our panel. I want to thank everybody here. I want to thank Climate Nexus for working with us at Planet Forward, at the George Washington University, and all of our consortium schools for this conversation. It's something that's very important. And for those of you who are reporters, for those of you who are communicators in whatever walk of life you pursue, I think there's some really important things to take away from this conversation about meeting people where they are, about recognizing the complexity of the story, about finding the characters who are compelling and real, about making it relatable to people, about not giving up, about finding lots and lots of different angles and aspects, because that's how you keep a story fresh and exciting and new. So thank you very much for joining us, and go save the planet. Thank you. Thank you.